Today, we can do the background, in a sense, the family story. You'll see that Dostoevsky believes a lot in heredity, that who the parents of the three brothers, or 3.5 brothers, are, is very important. And you'll see next time that he also believes a lot in childhood experiences being very important. I don't think we'll get to that today. I don't expect to, but I certainly expect to do mostly to talk about the brothers. So you notice, by the way, another reason for you that it's a great novel is they're roughly your age. They're a little older, but they're in their early 20s, and they are having all sorts of problems in a kind of dramatic Russian way that everybody has at their age. But there is the problem in being a Russian novel. It's so hard to keep track of who's who, because everybody seems to have about 5 different names, or at least a lot of the characters do. And I once, after worrying about that and feeling bad about that, and at least giving you a handout last time that was helping you to figure out who's who, I realized that at least there's nothing Russian about it. If you were reading a novel in which you heard about Mr. Smith, also called William, Bill, Billy, Will, and Willie, you'd know it was the same guy with all those names, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And moreover, and this is more important, you not only you'd understand it was the same person, you'd understand a lot about the person. I mean, that Charlie Brown is called Charlie Brown and not Charles Brown is obviously important. And when one of the women who loves him calls him Charles, you feel, boy, that's a different take on Charlie Brown. But anyway, you will see that the people, that who gets called by what sorts of nicknames, is very revealing about what kind of person they are. So, for instance, Dmitri, who's mostly called Mitya, or about half and half called Mitya, is somebody who's more or less half and half on a kind of formal and half on an informal relation to people. And more exciting and interesting examples are Alexei, that's Alyosha, but he's almost always called Alyosha because everybody's on friendly terms with him. And the most interesting to me is Ivan. Ivan has a nickname too, Vanka, and it turns out to be extremely important at a certain point in the book where there's a song about Vanka, which Ivan takes to be about him. But for years, I had no idea what was going on at that point. And you do, when you're paying attention, see that old Karamazov calls him Vanka now and then. But nobody's on familiar terms with Ivan. He is distant and aloof with everybody. And Smershikov, who's half a Karamazov brother, has no nickname at all as far as I know, or else that is his nickname. I don't know what to think about that, except that he's on weird terms with everybody. Okay, so much for that. But this reminds me of something I was going to say at the beginning, which if I don't say it, I'll forget. I have to take a kind of poll. When I was talking about the smallness of the book, I mean, usually it looks about twice as big when I order it and has a hardcover and looks like it might be the most serious, best novel in the world. I bought the small one, not because it makes much difference in the price, but because I was told that lots of people wanted a small one so they could carry it around in their backpack and read it on every possible occasion. And that obviously moves me much because I want you to read it on every possible occasion. So I just want to know for the next time I give the course, is it a good idea to have a little one like this, which is sort of hard on your eyes but easy to carry around? Or would you rather have a big one? How many are glad we've got a little portable one? Oh, I was well informed. How many are sorry we got a little portable one? Well, that's overwhelming. Okay, I won't use this one again because I discovered in reading it that to make it really small, they left off the epigraph, which I'll tell you what it is when the time comes, and they've left off a little 3-page introduction by the supposed author, which turns out not to be important, but you'd think they'd at least publish the whole book. And they've done subtle things with the translation, which makes it more sort of down to earth, but I'm so used to the old one, I can't help feeling that they've lost a little something. I'll tell you that when that's important, too. Okay, now back to where we were. So the amazing thing, which I sort of stumbled into when I started teaching this course a long time ago, is that Dostoevsky seems to have exactly Kierkegaard's view of the self, the different factors that go to make up a human being, the different sets of factors. Of course, it's hard to see because Dostoevsky never talks about the self, or very, very rarely mentions the self. So what is his name for whatever it is that has these contradictory sets of factors? Anybody know? You could cheat and find out. I think you have it in your hands, so that in what you just handed out, or what. So anyway, it's the heart. You hear Dostoevsky, and through Dmitri particularly, and we'll talk about it later today, talking about the contradictoriness of the human heart and laying out the factors with Dmitri's names for them. Everybody's got different names for the factors. Everybody's got different relations to the factors. Remember, the factors don't have a fixed meaning. It's part of what it is to be a self taking a stand on itself, that the set of factors is taking a stand on how to understand the set of factors that it is. You wouldn't believe anybody could say anything like that if you hadn't been through reading the definition of the self. So you want to know in Dostoevsky, like you want to know in Kierkegaard, so what stand should the self be taking on itself? How should it relate to itself? And the answer is, in Dostoevsky, like in Kierkegaard, there's no general moral principles that tell you what to do about it, or what it is, whether you should be living like the Greeks or Plato, dying to the body, or whether you should be living like a materialist, dying to the superstitions about religion and the soul and so forth. There's no answer to that you can get from reason or revelation. The only way you can get it, and this makes Dostoevsky an existentialist just like Kierkegaard, is by living one of these ways of relating to yourself, being a materialist or being spiritual or Platonic and so forth. And then either you'll see that that's a way of life that leads you to be joyful and maybe even blissful, or you'll see that that's a way of life that leads you to despair in Kierkegaard talk, and Dostoevsky too sometime, or madness, or suffering anyway. Although suffering, no, I won't think suffering, that's not the right word. Suffering can be a good thing, but despair and madness are not good things. And you will see, the way Dostoevsky sets it up, that each of the three brothers represents a stance of the self on what it is to be a self. And what becomes of them is telling you what it is, which is the best way to be, by showing you what happens to characters, people who take each of these stands on being a human being, these different existential types of human beings. And the right stand is the one that works, and by works means gives you a meaningful and happy life, as opposed to driving you toward, in effect, finally, suicide, as you'll see later on in the book. And so you keep that in mind. I see that I talk here about suffering. Suffering is a tricky notion. Dostoevsky thinks suffering, if you do it right, is a good thing. Here's another word for the wrong kind of suffering, and I meant to look it up before I came to see what this translation had done to it. In the translation I'm used to, there's a chapter called Lacerations in the Living Room. It's still called Lacerations. Well, I don't know a better translation for the word that's called lacerations, but that's a bad kind of suffering that keeps open the wound, self-torment, or something like that. Anybody's reading it in Russian? I need a Russian consultant. Every year when I do it, I need a Russian consultant. I have ideas like about how it should be, and I want to know whether I can twist the Russian around into saying what I want it to say. Okay, well, I know somebody who will tell me about the Russian. So let's go back to this. Now, So now we're going to go into what Dostoevsky calls the history of the family. That's what turns out. So that's the question of their hereditary traits. And what you have on the chart I gave you last time, I think, though I'm getting mixed up in my own head about, you've got 4 charts now. You've got the list of the characters in the book. You've got the family tree on the back of that. That's the one I want to talk about. You've got one that's going to come up by the end of today about the self, which I'm going to talk about. And you've got one pointing way ahead to the Grand Inquisitor that I'm not going to talk about till we get there. But you have so hold on to these charts and bring them with you because I don't want to keep writing them on the board because I write them on the board so badly nobody can read them anyway. I put them all on the website. So if for some reason you haven't got it or you lose it, you can do it again, print it again. Okay, now there are 4 Karamazovs, really, which is a good thing because there are really 4 ways to be a self in Kierkegaard. And you need to think about all of them. The first one, which you might not notice, the ones that you can understand obviously, I won't tell you yet who's who, though you ought to be able to figure it out. There's obviously the one that's trying to get the factors together by themselves, trying to get the factors together by getting rid of one side. Remember, negative R2. And there's somebody trying to get the factors together by getting both sides, doing justice to both sides of the self by themselves. And that's positive R2. And then there's the one that relates the factors to each other by relating to another. And that's what I call positive R3. But then there's room for a 4th one, which is this unconsciousness of despair, of spirit, of not being aware that you've got a self, of not facing up to the problems of the factors. And who could that be? Old Theodore, somebody said, I hope. The father. He's the one who is distracted all the time. So you see on page 19, I'm going to always cite this micro book. So that it isn't page 19. What happened here? Oh yeah, it's so much near the top I didn't see it. About 10 lines down. It talks about him as someone fairly frequently, the kind of person one fairly frequently to be met with, a despicable, vicious man, and at the same time, senseless. Well, already, I would like to see the Russian. I am convinced this reading through that that's a bad idea. I was in a sort of mood to be sort of demanding about the translation. And then, so senseless why is senseless bad for old Karamazov? Well, you sort of know enough already, wherever you are reading, to know maybe that he's smart enough to have made enough good business deals to be rich, and he's smart enough to sort of outmaneuver everybody else and carry on high-level and sort of witty theological debates with Ivan. So senseless doesn't seem quite right. The translation we used last time, the big hardcover one, said that he was muddled. I think that's not right either. I think the right word would be distracted. And it may well be that the same Russian word would do for all of those. He's a case of the kind of distraction that we've talked about in Pascal, whether it's computer games or tennis or sitting in your room doing geometry like Descartes or a dozen other things. There are ways to not worry about the problem of what it is to be a human being and that you've got to live your life in some one way or another. So he does that. He does it by drinking, chasing women, and playing the buffoon. He didn't have computer games. Just because he can't, and is that because he can't control his sensuality? Is he just a sensualist? No, he's trying to forget himself in his drunkenness and sex and avariciousness about money. You can see that on page 33. At the bottom. Of late, too, he looked somewhat bloated and seemed more irresponsible, more uneven, and sunken into a sort of incoherence. used to begin one thing and go on with another, as though he was letting himself go altogether. He was more and more frequently drunk. Well, he is sort of falling apart, and he's falling apart on purpose. You'll see that later more, but you already see it there. I think there's another place. Just a second. No, that's the main one. Where do we see here? We're going to hear more about him being distracted this way. Oh yeah, when he's in Zosima's cell, and we'll come back to that in a minute. So we'll get there quickly. So right now, all we know is he's sort of falling apart, and he's trying, I take it, not to be conscious of having a self, not to be aware of this contradiction. But it's not that he doesn't know it. It's in his behavior. You can see that he's really worried about it, and he's repressing it and fleeing it, covering up that he's worried about it. That becomes clear a little bit later. But it starts to show that he's got a self, and it's contradictory on 21, when his wife dies. Remember, he has two wives. The strong wife who beat him up, who's Adelaida, the mother of Dmitri, and a saintly, meek, religious wife, his second wife, who's the mother of Ivan and Alyosha. And you can't imagine, how Dmitri, who's the son of the strong mother, is in the army, and he's tough, and he's sometimes behaves ruthlessly, and you can't imagine either Ivan or Alyosha behaving like that. But it's interesting. It's one of the brilliant, deep things that though they couldn't be more different, Alyosha and Ivan, and we'll go into them in a minute, they do have something in common that comes from that mother that Dmitri doesn't have at all. And Dostoevsky's got this all worked out. So let's look at we're looking on page 21 at the bottom. It's not Adelaide. It's the which wife is dying here? It's the saintly one, I think. No, it's the one at the top of 21 who is he didn't beat his wife, he was beaten by her. For she was hot-tempered, bold, dark-browed, impatient woman possessed of remarkable physical strength. And Dmitri was the child of their child. And then she runs off and dies of either typhus or, as another version had it, of starvation. Say a word about that. That Dostoevsky is constantly doing this, and in the name of the supposed author of the book, who is one of the people who lives in the town, and who's not very bright, and who doesn't try to explain anything. He just sort of tries to give all the sort of available common sense options. But in fact, and what Dostoevsky really thinks is that people are complicated and contradictory, and the two seemingly opposed descriptions of which you have to take one or the other could both be right. We'll see that in just a second. But even the typhus and starvation thing is a hint of it. I mean, you don't have to decide whether she died of typhus or starvation. You can die of both if you're living in a garret with no money. So, but he says, according to one story, typhus, another starvation. Now comes back to Fyodor. Fyodor Karamazov was drunk when he heard of his wife's death, and the story is that he ran out into the street and began shouting with joy, raising his hands to heaven, "Lord, now lettest thou thy servant depart in peace." And others say he wept without restraint like a little child, so much so that people were sorry for him in spite of the repulsion he aroused. It's quite possible both versions were true. This is seems at first sight, very insightful from this author who doesn't really understand much. It is quite possible that both versions are true, that he rejoiced at his release and at the same time wept for her who released him. As a general rule, people, even the wicked, are much more naive and simple-hearted than we suppose, and we ourselves are too. You see anything funny about that conclusion after what I've been telling you? I mean, it doesn't show that people are naive and simple-hearted. It shows that people are complicated, much more complicated than we suppose, and we are too. People act from double motives, Dostoevsky says in The Idiot. That means they can be acting out of both their, say, compassion and pride. Or they all seemingly impossible combinations happen in Dostoevsky novels because the self is complicated. And again, we'll come back to that. There are all these things that I have to sort of lay out, but pretty soon they'll all be put back together again. So there he is, both. But there, back to the general thing, you see that he's not just a simple buffoon, that he obviously has strong contradictory feelings, that he apparently really loved her and really was annoyed at having her around and beating him up. So, did I see a hand over here? If so, yes, yeah. See, because you have a different book? I told you that you're going to have to get this one. Well, let's see how many different books are running around. If everybody has the same different book, I might be able to do it by chapter, but the stupid thing about this book, I do it by chapter with no problem. It doesn't have any chapter headings across the pages. Yours might. My previous one did. But in this one, I'd have to constantly go flipping around to find the beginning of the chapter, to find the number and the name. I can't do it. You got to buy this one. Stupid as that seems. Anything else? Okay, back to where I am. So in Dostoevsky, the way the book is set up is a little bit imperfect in one respect. Sometimes it's told from the point of view of this obtuse narrator who doesn't understand what's going on. And then when Dostoevsky wants you to understand what's going on, he shows you by the events. And the events often don't go along with this sort of voiceover that's describing them. And that's a neat move and fun, and he sort of starts out the book that way. But somewhere along the line, Dostoevsky more or less loses interest in maintaining this distance of the narrator who misses what's going on and who describes what you're seeing in a way that you can see is naive and doesn't fit it. That just gets to be too complicated. And then pretty soon the narrator starts describing events that he couldn't have been at, and starts describing what's going on in people's minds that he couldn't know. And more, he sort of fades out. You don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about the fact that you don't have to keep asking yourself who's talking, Dostoevsky or the narrator, because one thing is always clear. If you keep your eye on what the people are doing, that's the sort of existential bottom line. Never mind what anybody says. And people are always making up stories about each other in the book, which may or may not be true. That some people actually go out of their way to kind of fool other people about their motives. And Dostoevsky never says they fool people about their motives. He shows lots of different perspectives on them, and among them that they fool people, and then he shows what they do. And you know they are fooling people. Anything okay about that? Okay, I'll come back to you. If you want to say something, raise your hand, wave it around. I'll stop. But I can't tell whether you're sitting there thinking things until you wave your hands around. Okay, but because this book is just so complex that it's not as if we're going to get to the bottom of it ever. And I'm always learning new things. So if you think there's some angle that I'm missing, I'd love to know. Okay, but here we go. We're at the point. So now looking at old Karamazov still, you can see that he's complicated and he's worried about these factors, and that's why he's busy trying to forget them. So he says at the bottom of 52, everybody sort of confesses the truth when they're in Father Zosima's monastery cell. He says, let me really play the buffoon. I'm not afraid of your opinion, for you and every one of you are worse than I am. That's why I'm a buffoon. It's from shame, great elder, from shame. It's simply oversensitiveness that makes me rowdy. That's all true. If I had only been sure that everyone would accept me as the kindest and wisest of men, oh Lord, what a good man I would have been. Teacher, he fell suddenly on his knees. What must I do to gain eternal life? That's just great. Because, one, you could say, well, look, he's really worrying about the factors. That's the eternity factor, and he thinks that he's got to find a way of expressing it in his life. But on the other hand, he's buffooning as usual. So, as the book goes on, it was difficult even now to decide whether he was joking or really moved. And I think the answer, as usual, is both. That is, he's really moved and he's making a fool of himself and joking to cover up from himself and everybody else that he's really moved. And that gets clearer because it turns out that he's very worried about his eternal soul. And Zosima says, don't lie, and he admits he's been lying all along, but that's not so important. Now, 98 is the next thing that's important. And this is just, as if we didn't know already. I hope I've already convinced you. He's not dumb, and he's not muddled, and senseless. He's got just the same problem of the self as everybody else. He's just trying not to face it. So at the bottom of 98, corrupt and often cruel in his lust, like some poisonous insect, Fyodor Karamazov was sometimes in moments of drunkenness overcome by superstitious terror and a moral convulsion that took an almost physical form. My soul simply quakes in my throat at those times, he used to say. And he wanted, skipping down a little, somebody to defend him. From whom? From somebody unknown, but terrible and dangerous. So, in short, he's got the usual kind of fear of punishment, and he's got a sense of guilt, and he's very much worried about these things, but he also covers them up and doesn't want to face them. And so he keeps himself very busy. And in the middle of 134, just a passing remark, he says, the Lord God has given us so little time, only 24 hours in the day, so that one hasn't even time to get sleep enough, much less to repent of one's sins. So the moral is, if you keep yourself busy with women and drink and business trips and so forth, you don't have time to worry about the state of your eternal soul. And now comes a very interesting thing in this book. I try sometimes to read about the brothers Karamazov, but I never find anything interesting. If you ever happen to be reading about it and find something interesting, let me know. For instance, I've never seen anybody say something which is really funny and kind of obvious. Every one of the brothers has a female counterpart who has exactly the same existential stance as they have. And you can look for it, and you'll find it every time. You probably don't know, you probably haven't read far enough or haven't been looking enough. Who else is sort of, so keeps herself, that's a clue, herself so busy that she doesn't have time to think about her eternal soul, and distraction is her big job. Do you remember who that could be? Yeah. No. I'll get there by the end of today. Grushenka is somebody else's double. This is one you wouldn't expect. 64. It's Lisa's mother, Mrs. Holotov, who is also dithering around all the time so as not to face their real suffering. And she's just a wonderful character. I'll just read the crucial thing where she's at the top of 64. She's freaking out and breaking down in front of Father Zosima like everybody else. And she says, I've been suffering for so long. I'm suffering. Forgive me, I'm suffering. And then skipping a little, I suffer from lack of faith. He says, lack of faith in God? Oh no, I dare not even think about that. But life after death is such an enigma, and no one can solve it. Listen, you're a healer. you're deeply versed in humanity, and of course I dare not expect you to believe me entirely, but I assure you, and so forth and so forth. The thought of life beyond the grave fills me with anguish, with terror. See, just like old Karamazov in his moments of lucidity. And I don't know to whom to appeal, and have not dared to all my life. And now I am so bold enough to ask you, oh God, what will you think of me now? You notice anything crazy about that speech? I mean, just when she's finally confessing her deepest fear, she's worrying about whether she's making a fool of herself. And it's like old Karamazov. She's constantly sort of acting, where with him, remember, the comment was they didn't know whether he was serious or not when he breaks down and says, I fear for eternity. And now she's saying, I don't understand the afterlife. I don't understand, in effect, eternity. Oh, I must be making a fool of myself. What do you think of me now? As if she was at a dinner party being stupid. So so she's the double. I mean, she's down to the tiniest detail. The existential counterpart of old Karamazov, even though she's not drinking and debauched in business. Her existential business is running around, keeping from thinking. And so next, well, so much for old Karamazov. We go on to Ivan, unless anybody has something. Old Karamazov. Oh, I realize I didn't turn this on. Thanks to the marvels of iPods, it don't really need to turn it on. Are you all, how many are listening to this on their iPod or their podcast thing? Probably. I'm so glad you're all here. Thanks for coming. Instead of listening as you run around, it makes me happy to see you. And I trust that I'm sure that it makes a difference if you're sitting here following, wondering whether you should take the risk of saying something, and then taking the risk sometime of saying something. That's how you learn things. And whoever you are out there with your iPods listening to this, you're missing something. Okay. Now, we're on to Ivan. Okay. Now, Ivan, I don't know about you, but Ivan was by far my favorite Karamazov when I read the book in high school, or I think senior year. And it's why, and it's obviously why. He's he's the intellectual in the family. He's very clean cut. He's very honest with himself and everybody else, or so it looks anyway, and so he tries. And he, guess what, is a philosophy major in college and doing very well at it. So we'll see now. He turns out to be, however, furthest from salvation. And yet he has the same mother as Alyosha, who Alyosha is nearest to salvation. But they're on the same dimension. They're on a kind of spiritual dimension where Dmitri isn't, and certainly old Karamazov isn't. And so here we go. They're so different that old Karamazov forgets their brothers, and yet they have the same saintly mother, and they have, in a certain sense, the same concern. And they also, interestingly enough, both have a problem with being visited by devils somewhere in the course of the book, hallucinating devils. That's hardly make much of a fuss about Alyosha's devils. But he makes a whole chapter with Ivan confronting his devil. But the issue for them is purity. They both want to be pure, but they have completely different understandings of what it is to be pure. And we'll see that in a minute. I thought we would see it right now, but I'm surprised. Did I mess up? I just decided to do it later. Okay, I decided to do it later. We have to take a sort of step-by-step sneaking up start on it. But I'll just tell you, to begin with, they have two senses of purity. Ivan has a Greek sense of purity, and Alyosha has a Judeo-Christian sense of purity. And purity means entirely different things to the two of them. I might as well finish saying this. We'll come back to it, though. There's two words in German. The first time I understood anything in the Brothers Karamazov that was really important was when I read a book in German by an Italian priest. He really understood a lot. And one of the things he had was this important distinction, which you can make in German, between Reinheit and Lauterkeit. I'll write it on this board later. And Reinigung is what happens when you take something to the cleaners. And that means you get the dirt out and wash it away. And that's how you get cleanliness. It's reinheit is like cleanliness. Lauterkeit is purity. It comes from taking up and transforming all the dark side, all this part of you that you want to get rid of, and making it somehow into some positive part of you. And of course, the Reinheit, the cleanliness side, is the Greek side. I mean, where you want to die to your body and the finitude and just get rid of all these and appetites and all these bad distracting things. And what Jesus promises, it's not really a Judeo, it's a strictly Christian thing, is a kind of purity where everything about you will be transformed so that there isn't any, or that somehow even the dark side becomes something positive. And one, of course, you can tell which brother's doing which. You ought to be able to tell that even now. Ivan, which one of these is Ivan? The what? Yeah, that's right. The cleanliness one. I mean, that's why it makes sense for him to be a philosopher, which is a Greek business. In fact, I think he's a kind of Platonist. There's a hint of that at one point. I'll read you. And the one who is obviously struggling for purity, and it's a big problem for him, is Alyosha. And we'll see about that. But now let's go through Ivan step by step. I jumped ahead. Ivan is a self-made man. He realizes early on that he's living off relatives and dependent on them, and probably they even resent having him around, but they have to rescue him because when after his wife dies, old Karamazov just ignores the children, and they're running around sort of in tatters. And so some relatives or other take over Ivan, and I think other different relatives, it's not spelled out, take over the other children. They're all taken up by somebody. But the fascinating thing is that Ivan and Alyosha had entirely different reactions. Ivan resents the fact that he has to be taken care of and be dependent on some other people, and that he has a father who is an embarrassment. Alyosha is just the opposite. He never notices that he's dependent on others for support. People are always glad to take care of him, and he's always glad to let them take care of him. You keep your eyes open for something you can help me answer, a question I got in my head too late last time to read. I can't read the whole book through to find out. I think that Alyosha, after he leaves the monastery, where, of course, they give him food and clothes, never seems to have a problem about nice clothes he's described as wearing. At one point, he's described as walking around eating a bread roll, because he was hungry. People feed him, people clothe him, people take care of him, but we've never told who. And it just doesn't even occur to him, and therefore it doesn't sort of show up in anything he does, that he's even grateful. He just accepts that. He would take care of anybody that needed taking care of, and anybody would take care of him because he needs taking care of. And we'll see. I mean, keep your eye open. Tell me if you find out who's housing. I don't even know where he's living. Where does he live after he leaves the monastery? And where did he get these nice clothes that the kids admire at one point? I have no idea. And I think Dostoevsky is doing that on purpose, or else I'm missing it. Okay. Now, so Ivan, because he doesn't want to be dependent on others, the way Alyosha is, and take anything from them, is determined to be self-sufficient. So, whereas Alyosha lets anybody take care of him, and as you'll see, Dmitri is trying to get money from his father all the time, Ivan, from the very start, and it's admirable, tries to take care of himself on 27. See, starting at about 2/3 down, the paragraph that begins, I won't go into detail, I'll read you something that I've been talking about. Of the elder, Ivan, I will only say that he grew into a somewhat morose and reserved, though far from timid boy. At 10 years of age, he had realized that he and his brother were not living in their own home, but on other people's charity, and that their father was a man of whom it was disgraceful to speak. Then he also, very early, was brilliant and showed an unusual aptitude for learning. You see that next. And then in the next paragraph, that it says in the second sentence, he entered a university, and all the time he was in the university. Somewhere it says what he studied. I guess we haven't got to that yet. He studied, oh yeah, next page. But anyway, he enters the university, and all the time he was in the university, he was forced to support himself all the time he was studying. And that's interesting. But Dostoevsky is always making sort of three-cornered shots with one ball or whatever. And he isn't enough to just tell you that he's got a job and supports himself when he's in the university. He tells you what job. And the job he's got is just wonderful for understanding him. A little further. However that may seem, let's see, where were he? This is fun. I skipped something I haven't marked here, but I'll read it. It must be noted that he did not even attempt to communicate with his father, perhaps from pride, perhaps from contempt for him, or perhaps from his cool common sense, which told him that from such a father he would get no assistance. Do you have to choose one of those? No, you want them all, I presume. It makes it for his father, with pride and sense, and good. So he had three good reasons for not getting in touch with his father. It's interesting to know the three brothers' relation to the father. Ivan, who has this sort of intellectual attitude, has contempt. Dmitri, who's the emotional hothead in the family, has loathing for the father. And Alyosha, of course, has commiseration and understanding and loves him and tries to help become a better person. But back to here now. He supports himself. How? At the bottom of 27. Ivan wasn't despondent and succeeded in getting work, at first giving lessons, and afterwards, this is the good part, getting paragraphs on street incidents into the newspapers under the signature of eyewitness. Now, that's just a little subtle thing that goes by, because you don't know yet that Ivan is the spectator of everything. That's part of his philosophical perspective. He is the aloof observer. He's sort of visiting the world and looking in on it and judging it, but not taking any part. I'll give you more examples before we leave Ivan. But that he should be observing people who are presumably intensely involved in something, having a lover's quarrel or stealing an apple and being chased by the merchant or whatever. The people are involved, and Ivan is there watching it with complete equanimity, writing down what's happening and selling it to the newspaper. And that little touch is just so neat because it's so characteristic of his it's a part of his very existential stance that he would get a job like that. And where else? Where am I? 27? 28? Oh yeah, well, I just want to point out about 15 lines down, he was a student of natural science. See, I said he was philosophy. I think he's a student of natural philosophy. That really hasn't branched out into philosophy and science yet in Dostoevsky's time, at the time of the brothers. So it was a study of the nature, but also of human nature, and it was what you would be majoring in, I think. At least if you were a philosopher in your interests. And where else? Okay, so much for that aspect of it. So we've got him now showing pride. Being self-sufficient is a great thing for the Greeks. I mean, Agamemnon was self-sufficient. All heroes are self-sufficient. And generally, the only alternative to being self-sufficient is to be slavishly dependent on somebody or something. But, of course, from a Christian point of view, we talked about that. Being self-sufficient is a very, very bad thing. Pride is the thing that we are the people at the bottom of the inferno in Dante who are self-sufficient, who are so detached and cold-blooded that they're literally frozen in ice, and then I mentioned this, I think, but I'll mention it again because of the third man, the bottom people are so self-sufficient that they're ready to betray anybody just to be self-sufficient. That's Harry Lime. Those are the worst things. People are the totally selfish and totally self-sufficient and thereby betraying type of people. Ivan's got a big betrayal problem going on later in the book. So, where are we? Oh, yeah, okay. So now we'll see what happens in Zosima's cell, where everybody is revealing. Dostoevsky is very clever to have this family meltdown take place in Zosima's cell, where everybody tells you right off in front of everybody else what they are really up to, and that's a good way to get started. And so everybody's confessing, and everybody's going crazy, and guess what? Alyosha is totally involved in upset, and Ivan is watching this like a spectator, as if he was going to, he could give a story to the newspaper. Oh, he's not going to do that with this one. At the bottom of 51, Alyosha stood with hanging head on the verge of tears. What seemed to him strangest of all was that his brother Ivan, on whom alone he had rested his hopes, and who alone had such influence on his father that he could have stopped him, sat quite unmoved, with downcast eyes, apparently waiting with interest to see how it would end, as though he had nothing to do with it. That really sums up this observer stance of Ivan. And Dostoevsky, as a Christian, but a very special sort of Christian, is very, very down on this sort of detached self-sufficiency in which someone doesn't feel involved with other human beings and the world at all. Ivan is just too good for this world, and that's not a position to want. That turns out not to be a good position to be in, as you can imagine. But Dostoevsky has to show you. He can't just tell you, and it takes a while till we see how badly things go for him. But let's go on. He's an intellectual. He's the only brother that goes to the university. Alyosha went to the monastery. Dmitri goes to the army. Everybody goes where they belong. And Ivan goes to the university. And he's all of this, and particularly I think going into philosophy and science, is something that shows that he's striving for some goal that they mostly can't understand. And they're trying to figure out, what does Ivan really want? And you can see it if you keep your eyes open. On 42, 10 lines, 6 lines down, Alyosha, that is he, attributed his brother's coolness at first to a difference in their age and education, but he also wondered whether the absence of curiosity and sympathy in Ivan might be due to some other cause entirely unknown to him. He kept thinking that Ivan was absorbed in something inward and important, that he was striving towards some goal, perhaps very hard to attain. Well, that's right, he is, and the goal is, you get clearer about it on 77. This very elusive conversation between Zosima and Ivan, which is very important and interesting and obscure, on 77. I'm going to read it starting about a third down. Father Zosima asked Ivan, it's complicated. Dostoevsky is sort of laying out a whole lot of his philosophy on these 2 pages. And it's about, if there's no God, then all things are possible, as somebody says later in the book. Who says? Ivan. But he doesn't say it quite that way here, he said. But he does say at the bottom of 76 that it's only because of religion and belief in immortality that people are good. If you destroy in mankind the belief in immortality, not only love, but every living force maintaining the life of the world would be dried up. Moreover, nothing would be immoral. Everything would be lawful, even cannibalism. And jumping ahead, Zosima says, do you really believe that? The middle of, is that really your conviction? A third of the way down on 77. As to the consequences of the disappearance of faith in immortality, Father Zosima now asks Ivan, yes, that's my contention. There is no virtue if there's no immortality. You are blessed in believing that, or else most unhappy. Why unhappy? Ivan asked, smiling. Because in all probability you yourself don't believe in the immortality of your soul, nor in what you've written in your article on church jurisdiction. We have to discuss the article on church jurisdiction at a different later. Perhaps you are right, but I wasn't altogether joking, Ivan suddenly and strangely confessed, flushing quickly. You were not altogether joking, that's true. The question is still bothering your heart. It is still unanswered. But the martyr sometimes likes to divert himself with his despair, as if driven to it by despair itself. Meanwhile, in your despair, you too divert yourself. They're still discussing this question of immortality. It's a question you have not answered, and this is your great grief, for it clamors for an answer. That's what Zosima says. But can it be answered by me? Answered in the affirmative, Ivan went on, asking strangely, still looking at the elder with the same inexplicable smile. Then Zosima says this interesting, complicated thing. If it can't be decided in the affirmative, you will never decide in the negative. You know that. That is the peculiarity of your heart. That's the self. And all this suffering is due to it. But thank the Creator who's given you a heart capable of such suffering. Remember, suffering is a good thing. You can see that. Of thinking and seeking higher things. That sounds Platonic, thinking and seeking higher things. What's wrong with things around here? For our dwelling is in the heavens, Zosima said. I'm going to try to convince you later that Zosima is sort of traditional kind of Christianity mixed up with Platonism. That he never quite gets it right. Then here, but almost. So here he says, so our dwelling is in the heavens. God grant that your heart will attain the answer on earth. And may God bless your path. So he's got his foot in both of the stories. He's like Kierkegaard in thinking that if you're not blissful on earth, then you've lost it. You're in despair. Even if there is an afterlife, you should be able to get meaning and bliss here in the finite temporal on earth. But he also thinks, in a way that Kierkegaard would never say, I think, that our dwelling is in the heavens. That's Plato-like, saying that we all should be and are, in a way, friends of God and can merge with God. So anyway, so Zosima is this interesting character. And whenever you read Zosima, you have to see that he's so advanced, and he's made Christian love into a science, as it says in some place. And you can see here, he's a super therapist. He's gotten them all confessing, an existential therapist confessing their ultimate existential ambitions and fears in one afternoon and giving them advice about how to fix it. But yet, he never quite gets it. And why he doesn't quite get it, I can't tell you yet. So where are we? Okay, we just did the goal. We haven't quite done the goal, because it gets a little clearer what the goal is. Well, this goal is, in some way, a kind of eternal perfection. And now I want to say he wants to be pure, but I don't think I should say that. He wants to be clean, or clear. No, clear is too much like purity. He wants to be clean. And that's the sense in which he's a Platonist. And if our dwelling was in heaven, then why shouldn't we just leave the earth and go and dwell in the heaven? And all the stuff that comes from having bodies and all the bad stuff would just be left behind. And that's not Dostoevsky's idea, and it's not Kierkegaard's idea of the finite. The temporal and finite are just as important as the eternal. And earth is just as important as heaven. And unless you get the earthly and the heavenly together, you haven't got it made. That's Dostoevsky's formulation of it. He has lots of formulations of it, but one of them is that way of thinking about it. And Zosima understands that, and he's trying to steer Ivan in this right direction of getting the earthly and heavenly together. And I just read the part where he said it. So he wants Ivan to seek perfection, not in the lofty, intellectual, prideful reasoning, but something more lowly. He wants him to get involved with people. He wants him to get involved with living in the world. And Ivan, of course, is going to resist that. He'll very much resist. So then comes my story about the two kinds of purity. What Ivan wants is this kind of Reinheit, cleanliness. And what he should be wanting is the kind of purity. I'll give you an example of the purity in just a minute. I'm going to catch up to where I am. So Ivan wants to get rid of what he calls the lackey side, the Karamazov side, the earthy side of his nature. If you look at the picture of the self, you can see Ivan has those factors. And that's his idea. Of the earthy factors are also called lackey factors. I hope they still are in this translation. I think they are. But lofty has been translated fine in one place, I thought. Not quite right. Lofty's got to be up toward this heavenly. So keep your eyes open for that. How the factors get named. Tell me if they get named differently than I name them on the chart. That's just one more reason to find. I'll find a small book next time. That's what you all want, but it won't be this book. I'll have to find a small book that doesn't mess with the fruitful words. Okay, now let's see. So he wants to be rid of the lackey side. It's very important that he calls it the Karamazov side. That's the sensualist, insect, earthy side. And he wants to out of that. So he's in despair at not willing to be himself. Because he is a Karamazov. And he has got an earthy side. He'd like to be an angel. But he's not an angel. And remember the line from Pascal. We are neither angels nor brutes, and he who would play the angel plays the brute. You should get a glimmer from Pascal that Ivan is going to be very dangerous. And it's a sort of Graham Greene-like intuition. People who try to be pure and innocent and absolutely good and not involved with evil, they're dangerous people. So and what would be purity would be being compassionate with people and accepting all your impulses. And then they would gradually become good. That's what Zosima thinks. And in that, Zosima's right. I mean, Dostoevsky agrees with him. This is on page 66. Interestingly enough, it comes in a speech that Zosima gives to Mrs. Holocaust, who's worried so much about her bad side. And he says, what seems to you bad within you, this is about a third of the way down on 66, will grow purer, and the very fact of your, from the very fact of your observing it in yourself. Avoid fear, too, though fear is only the result of falsehood. Never be frightened at your own faint-heartedness and so forth. Skipping down a lot. Active love is a labor, the end of the paragraph now, and fortitude for some people too, perhaps a complete science, that's him. But I predict that just when you see with horror that in spite of all your efforts, you are getting further from your goal instead of nearer it, at that very moment I predict that you will reach it and behold clearly the miraculous power of the Lord. Gee, that's not quite the quote I expected. It's not wrong. There's a place where he tells her that if she dwells on the bad side of her and accepts it, she'll be okay. Did he say that? Not quite. Well, let me see if I can find it. No, I have to make a note. I'll tell you next time. There's a place where he says, if you find it, let me know. He says if you sort of contemplate and face up to the bad side of yourself. Does it say that? I don't think so. Does it ever? Not quite clearly. It will become pure. It's sort of implicit in there. That's the moment when you look at yourself with horror, you discover everything is going to turn out all right. But I'm still trying to, I got to keep looking for a minute, because there's a place where it's important, very important, to get the right view of purity. Could be anything. Well, I guess maybe for the time being we'll have to settle. What seems to you bad within you will grow purer from the very fact of your observing it in yourself. I did read it. I just didn't see that. I thought he was going to explain it. But that's the idea. And we'll find it happening in detail later in the book. So one way to put it is that Ivan is trying to be like Plato. And Alyosha is trying to be like Jesus. That is, two just different ways of being a good person, being pure. Now back to Ivan. Ivan, little clues that Ivan is a Platonist you can find around on 561, for instance, jumping way ahead of where you are, but it doesn't matter. It happens to be, it could have been said anywhere in the book. Somebody just says in passing, I forget who says it. Who says it? Dmitri says it at the bottom of that big paragraph on 561. Ivan has no God, he has an idea. Well, I mean, if you're stretching a little, Plato thinks that the ideas are these otherworldly, pure forms that we should merge with. And that is his goal, to get out of the world and merge with these pure forms. And now, all we need, we've already discussed old Karamazov and his double. Who's the double of Ivan? You probably haven't read far enough, but yeah, you should have, to get a glimmer. Who is the one who thinks that they're so pure and lofty that they make everybody else feel ashamed of themselves? And who's really terribly prideful? Got to be a woman. Ivan is going to love her because she's his existential double. It's Katerina Ivanovna. And so you get this on 56. No, not 56. 62. There's lots going on with her. She's just another bad, dangerous person who cons everybody into thinking she's a good person. At the bottom of 62. At the bottom, she is such a fine, and the other translation says lofty, which I think is better. It's such a lofty, wonderful creature, if only for her suffering. And then on the next page, or not really, 64. No, I've got to find more about herself. Yvonne, how about 116? No, I'm not doing one. I think it's got to be then 120 and 121. Yes, bottom of 120. I think Ivan is talking now, but it doesn't matter who. She loves her own virtue, not me. No, it's Dmitri. The words broke involuntarily and maliciously from Dmitri. He laughed. And he says, I swear, Alyosha, at the top of the next page, with intense anger at himself, as God is holy and Christ is God, I swear that though I smiled at her lofty sentiments just now, there's the lofty, I know that I'm a million times baser in soul than she. And so I swear that those lofty sentiments of hers are as sincere as a heavenly angel's. She's just like Ivan is trying to be sort of better than everybody. So she's trying to be better than everybody and deny the dark side. Okay, we got just a little enough time to go on. We got to do Dmitri. That's the punchline for this lecture. So let's go on to Dmitri. And because I also told you who the right double is a while back. Okay, Dostoevsky creates a revealing scene when we first see Dmitri, and you presumably have mostly read that already. How many have got up to page 75? Okay, you recognize what that's going to be, but what you don't recognize until you read it a lot of times is the amazing way that Dostoevsky introduces Dmitri on page 75. Dmitri, a young man of 28, of medium height, listen to this and see what's weird about this description as he comes in. An agreeable appearance, looked older than he was. He was muscular and strong, yet there was something not healthy about his face. It was rather thin. His cheeks were hollow and his complexion sallow. His large, prominent, dark eyes had an expression of determination, and yet there was a vague look in them, too. Even when he was excited and talking irritably, his eyes somehow did not follow his mood, but betrayed something else, something quite incongruous, which he was, from what he was saying. It was hard to tell what he's thinking, many said. People who saw something pensive and sullen in his eyes were startled by his sudden laugh, which revealed light-hearted thoughts, while his eyes seemed so gloomy. What is weird about that description? Get it? You hear it? It's just a whole bunch of contradictions. I wrote them down here. He's young, but he looks old. He's muscular, and yet he's unhealthy. He seems to have firm determination, and yet he has a vague look in his eyes. He has a melancholy glance, but he bursts into laughter. And finally, at the end of the paragraph, you get the punchline. It's true, he was of an excitable nature and then of an unstable and imbalanced mind. Well, that's getting close. What he's got is his contradictory self. He's really revealing it in the way he looks, and in the way he acts, in the way he thinks. He's got the insect versus angel, in his language, Sodom versus Madonna problem. It full on 112. And this is the contradictory self now sort of right up front on 112 when he starts explaining it. And that it's the Karamazov self. And the Karamazovs are the most extreme version of the two sides that he sees. Okay, here we go. I'm in that insect, Alyosha, and so forth and so forth. Beauty's a terrible thing, and God sets us nothing but riddles. Here are the boundaries meet, and all contradictions exist side by side. Remember, from Pascal on, the existentialists have got the idea that the self is a contradiction. So then let me skip a little. Beauty, I can't bear the thought of a man of lofty mind and heart, begins with the ideal of Madonna and ends with the ideal of Sodom. That's too easy. That's just a combination. What we want is something worse. The self is a synthesis. The more Sodom, the more Madonna, and vice versa. That's what he really thinks. What is still more awful is that a man with the ideal of Sodom in his soul does not renounce the ideal of the Madonna, and in his soul and his heart may be on fire with that ideal, genuinely on fire, just as in the days of his youth. So they have them together. And then he says, yes, man is too broad, man meaning the self here, is broad, too broad, I'd have him narrower. And then at the very last famous lines of that thing, God and the devil are fighting there, that is in the soul of man, and the battlefield is the heart of man, self. I mean, putting it in terms of God and the devil is getting it all wrong, because the two halves are equally important and valuable. But the way Dmitri has set it up, he's named the dark side, the earth side, all kinds of bad names, insect, Sodom, and so forth, and the heavenly side, all these good names, Madonna. He's going to have to change that way of thinking, as he will in the course of the book, in order to get them together. If you're going to name them that way, you're never going to get them together. They're just going to exist in a continual conflict. And you will just keep flipping back and forth, as he does, or as he says he does. Where is it when he's going down? He's Where's the passionate heart heals up? Coming pretty soon. Okay, we want to see that. Because at the moment that he's going down into the depths, he's also singing praise to God. I don't know. I can't probably find that quote, but I wasn't planning to read it. So I'll start with it next time. But I do want to read one more thing. Just a second. It should be very near here, that when he's going in head first, we should be able to find it. At the very moment that he's going most into sensuality and lust, he begins to sing a praise to God. Come on, let's find that. When everybody finds it, yell. Okay, I think it's the middle of 111. And whenever I happen to sink into the vilest degradation, and it's always happening. I always read the poem and such, for when I leap into the pit, and I'm pleased to be falling and pride myself on it, I begin a hymn of pit. I mean, that's his in these two. Why this funny? Yeah, I know. That is not funny. So you couldn't hear me now. I'm not sure the white lights going on and off. It said I'm looking up and looking down. But anyway, did you hear me read the quote? What? Read it again. Okay, here I am in the middle of 111. And whenever I've happened to sink into the vilest degradation, and it's always been happening, I always read the poem about Ceres and man and so forth. Never mind that. For I'm a Karamazov. Karamazov's a name for this self that's just contradictory and too broad. For when I do leap into the pit, I go headlong with my heels up, and I'm pleased to be falling and pride myself on it. And very depth of degradation, I begin a hymn of praise. Let me be accursed, let me be vile and base, only let me kiss the helm of the veil in which my God is shrouded. Though I may be following the devil, I am thy son, O Lord, and I feel the joy without which the world cannot stand. And then we might as well, so we've got this at the top of 112, this combination. To angels, visions of God's throne, to insect, sensual lust. And then he says, I am that insect, Alyosha. And it's said of the Karamazovs that they're such insects. Let's read all of that. I finally found the important part. 112. An angel as you are, that insect lives in you too. And we're going to hear more about that when we get to Alyosha next time. He's a sensualist too, it turns out. And will stir up a tempest in your soul. Tempest because sensual lust is worse than a tempest, and so forth. Here the boundaries meet, and all contradictions exist side by side. That's the missing piece I wanted to read. And now there's only just time to do one very quick, simple thing. Who's the existential double for... no, there are two important things. We have time for that. On 81, it turns out this amazing move that knowing that Dmitri is the one who's got this problem of the self in the most extreme form and is trying to deal with it and can't, who gets the final award, so to speak, of all the confessions in Zosima's cell? Dmitri turns out to be the one who Zosima thinks is, so to speak, living as best you can on your own, anyway, the complications, the contradictions of being a human being. So in 81, 2/3 of the way down, the scene was suddenly cut short with in the most unexpected way. Father Zosima rose from his seat, almost distracted with anxiety for the elder. Alyosha rushed to support. Alyosha supported him by the arm, always involved, of course. Ivan would have been just watching. Father Zosima moves toward Dmitri, reached him, sank on his knees before him. Alyosha thought that he'd fallen from weakness, but that was not so. The elder distinctly and deliberately bowed down at Dmitri's feet till his forehead touched the floor. Alyosha was so astonished that he failed to help him up when he got up again. Goodbye, forgive me, and so forth. Zosima leaves. Well, that's a puzzle. Left doesn't get explained, but later it gets explained. Zosima says he bowed down to Dmitri in appreciation of the great suffering in store for him, because Dmitri isn't hiding the self as old Karamazov, and he isn't trying to get rid of half of the self like Ivan. He's trying on his own, that's positive R2, to get himself together, and he has to, and he can't, and that's the suffering in store for him, part of it anyway. Now, who's the double? Well, no reason why you should know. It doesn't happen until way later in the book, on 422. But you ought to know, because who's Ivan's girlfriend? Don't you even know that yet? Grushenka. And of course, if it's Grushenka, then Dostoevsky's going to give you the existential double talk, so to speak. Here we are on 422. They have this big party and they get drunk, and she says, a little below the middle, I'm a beast, that's what I am, but I want to pray. Sound familiar? And then skip the onion, we don't know that. Wicked as I've been, I want to pray. Dmitri, let them dance. Everyone in the world is good. Everyone, even the worst of them. The world's a nice place. We're bad and the world's all right. We're good and bad, good and bad. See, that's her simple version of this. It's on the chart as on the one side the beast, on the other side the prayer, on one side the bad, the other side the good. She's got exactly Dimitri's understanding of the factors, and she's got his problem. And we have to see they'll both deal with it in the same way eventually. Okay. What happened there? Why did I lose time?